All right, today we're going to finally look at augmented and diminished intervals, which is the final piece of the puzzle to understanding all of the intervals that we could encounter. And this gets really fun because when we're talking about now intervals, we're looking at some chords. We're talking about really complex chords that we could have. So diminished chords, or even things with like sharp 5, sharp 9, sharp 11, these really complex chords, it finally makes sense using these intervals. Today I'm going to show you all the tips and tricks I've been using to teach hundreds of students all about intervals, and especially these augmented and diminished intervals, which are arguably the hardest to understand. So today let's make them really easy to comprehend. At the end of the video, I even have a bunch of practice examples to work through together so that you'll fully understand everything there is to know about intervals. And for hanging out with me today, I have a free music theory survival guide. Just go to joshring.com/free. It has all of these intervals, all of the most common ones that you'll encounter, and a whole lot more to help you. So again, looking at this nice graph that we've been using, right? So perfect and major being kind of the starting spots that we could have. If you lower major, you get to minor. But if you raise perfect or major, you get to an augmented interval. So let's look at those first. So here I have my C major scale. So all of these are going to be major intervals or perfect intervals. So if I raise any of them, I suddenly have augmented. So now all of these are augmented intervals with these nice sharps there. I could even have an augmented 8 there. Or I could have an augmented unison, right? C to C sharp. Or if I lower these intervals, I get to diminish, right? So perfect lowered once gets you to diminished, but major you have to lower twice to get to diminished. So don't forget that there's no such thing as like a minor fourth, right? So perfect doesn't go to minor, perfect goes straight to diminished. So here I have like that C minor-ish scale. Most of this is from the C natural minor, but I have a D flat in there because all of these are minor intervals or perfect intervals. So if I lower them one more time, I get to diminish. So there's my diminished second. On down the line I go. There's my diminished 8, my diminished octave. I could even have something like a C up to like a C flat. So there's my diminished 1. You don't really see that as often. So again, raise perfect or major to get to augmented, lower perfect or minor to get to diminished. All right, so just like we had with inversions, major being the opposite to minor when we have our intervals and inversions, right? So augmented and diminished are opposites, right? So on the way up, we had augmented because I've raised everything. And on the way down for in the descending intervals, I would have then diminished intervals, right? So the C, the F sharp is my augmented fourth, or my C down to F sharp is my diminished fifth. All right, same kind of thing. If they are diminished as ascending intervals, they would be augmented on the way down. All right, so looking at some common ones we have here of the fourth, augmented fourth or diminished fifth, right? Depending on if your spelling is F sharp or G flat. I could have a C to G sharp as an augmented fifth, or this C to B double flat as a diminished seventh. And again, the most common being the tritone, right? So that C to F sharp being your augmented fourth, or C down to F sharp being your diminished fifth, right? Or as a G flat, it'd be a diminished fifth on the way up, or a augmented fourth on the way down. All right, so there's your tritones and harmonically. All right, so let's look then at some common chords where you might see these intervals. So here we have that augmented fourth being in the middle of this D7, so this D dominant 7. So the C to the F sharp, there's your augmented fourth. You might see the diminished fifth, and any diminished triad or even seventh chord would have a diminished fifth in there, at least one. We could have an augmented fifth, and as part of this F augmented chord. Or this diminished 7 is really common in these diminished 7s, these fully diminished 7s, right? So the F sharp up to E flat being your diminished 7th. Some other places you might run across like augmented seconds in this harmonic minor scale. You have an augmented second between this flat 6 and this then normal 7th, the raised 7th back up to the major perspective, right? So there's an augmented second. So like this E Hungarian minor would have an augmented second between this G to A sharp, so the minor third to the kind of sharp 4 there of the scale. Then again, we still have the C to D sharp as another augmented second. Some other common uses of these augmented intervals is in some complex chords. So C to F sharp is an augmented fourth, but if we put the F sharp up an octave, that now becomes an 11th, or the D sharp up an octave would become a 9th as well. So let's unpack that a little bit. So we've been working with C to C as an octave, but if we went beyond the octave, then now the C would become, the 2 would become 9. Technically the E is 10ths we could have, or 4s would be 11s, another common one. 5ths here you could see is 12s, but 13s would be the same as 6. Technically 7 is the same as 14, and on down the line 8 is the same as 15. Just all of these are what we call compound intervals because they are beyond the octave. simple intervals, what we call, with up to an octave. So for using tertian harmony, which is the most common that we might encounter in the West, so we have like a C major 7, 1, 3, 5, 7. I could add some notes beyond that, right? With the D, I might personally add like an F sharp, but it'd be some type of 11th. And then on down the line we go if we wanted to add even the A, right? So we can have some complex things with 9s, 11s, and 13th chords here. So going back to these common things, you might run across this sharp 11 interval in something like this D major 9 sharp 11. So it's got the major 9 in there, and it's got that sharp 11, that augmented 11th interval. Or you might run across this G 7 sharp 9, so it's a G dominant 7th underneath, and now it has the A sharp on top, so it's got this really nice crunch to it. And before we start practicing together, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps you spread the word so I can keep helping as many people as possible. So let's say I have this F sharp. I want to go a diminished 5th up, so let's break that down. So size first, so 5th up would get us to some type of C. And what I like to do is compare it to either the perfect starting spot or the major starting spot, depending on the size. So 5ths would be perfect as a starting spot. So C sharp would be the perfect 5th. So then a half step down, we've lowered the perfect down once, gets us to the C. There's our diminished 5th. And just to break it down, the inversion F sharp down to C would then be an augmented 4th down. So what about an augmented 4th up from the A flat, right? So again, perfect to start. So A flat would be up to 4th to some type of D. To make it perfect, it would have to be a D flat. So then to make it augmented, we have to raise the D flat up to D natural. There is our augmented 4th. And just to show you that if we had the A flat down to a D, that would have been the inversion of a diminished 5th down. Okay, what about some augmented seconds? We have an F up a second would be some type of G. So F to G, that's a whole step. So that's a major second right now. So I want to augment it. I'm going to raise the G up. Now I have F to G sharp. And if for some reason we wanted to invert that, we would have an F down to a G sharp. So that'd be diminished would be the opposite. So it'd be a diminished 7th. All right, what about a diminished 7th up from, say, C sharp? So to start, we need to know the size. So C sharp up to some type of B would be a 7th. So let's start with a major perspective. So C sharp major would get us to a B sharp would be the major 7th. We lower it once, we have a minor 7th, so C sharp up to B natural. And if I lower it one more time, I get to diminish, so C sharp up to then B flat, right? So B flat would be our diminished 7th. Or we could practice this using the inversion. So that'd be an augmented 2nd down. So C sharp to B flat would be your augmented 2nd. So let's try this really crazy melody that we have. All right, and I actually use this from the Hungarian minor. So this is the C Hungarian minor scale. So let's first get up our sizes. So I have now ascending and descending, just sizes. Now I have to worry about the quality of each of them. So let's start with our seconds first. So that E flat to F sharp, right? That's 3 half steps, right? So the E flat to F natural would be major. 1 step higher than major gets us to augmented. Then in the next measure, we have a B down to an A flat. All right, so that's 3 half steps, right? So the B down to an A, or even B flat down to A flat, whichever starting spate you want to use. That would be a major 2nd, right? Because it would be a whole step. All right, so one more step gets us to augmented because we've raised the major up. And then at the very, very end, we have the B natural to the C natural, right? So that's just a half step. That's just a boring minor 2nd after all of the crazy augmenteds that we have had. So let's do a few thirds. So right out of the gate, C to E flat, there's our minor 3rd, right? Because the major perspective would be C to E, right? So we've lowered the major to get to minor. Then later we have the D to F sharp, and still in the middle of the first measure, right? So that D to F sharp, we know that's major already. Don't need to worry about that. This is weird. A flat to F sharp. Technically, just a whole step. But we know it has to be some type of 3rd because it's an A to an F. All right, so it would be F sharp up to A sharp would be the 3rd note of the F major scale. Lower, so that's a major 3rd. Lower it once, we get to a minor 3rd of F sharp to A. And then we get to now lowered twice, right? We get to then the diminished 3rd of F sharp to A flat. Some fourths that we have in the second measure, beginning of the second measure, we have the F sharp to B. There's your perfect 4th. Again, this is the exception to the rule of perfects have to have the same accidental. Whenever you have B and F involved, one of them is going to be different to be perfect. And then at the end of the second measure, we have the E flat down to B. right? Normally we would have it to be perfect, it would be E flat down to a B flat, right? And since we've made it smaller, now we have E flat to B natural. There's your diminished, right? Because we've made it smaller from the perfect. We have a fifth in here, right? Between the first and second measure, the C down to an F sharp. So to make it perfect as a starting spot, F sharp to C sharp would be perfect, needed the same interval. We've then lowered the C sharp down to C natural, right? Since we've lowered it, made it smaller, and we have diminished. All right, some sevenths that we have. First measure, D up to C, right? Normally D to C sharp would be major, but we've lowered it, so now we have minor seventh. And then in the middle of the second measure, we have the F sharp way up to the high E flat, right? Normally to be major, it would be the F sharp to E sharp. We've lowered the F sharp from the major seventh to the minor seventh, F sharp to E. Lowered it one more time, F sharp to E flat. Now we have diminished. And again, this is on that survival guide that you downloaded. If you haven't yet, please go do that at joshring.com/free. This is the music theory survival guide. This has a lot of the most common intervals that you might run across. One that you might add is maybe the diminished seventh, but all of these other ones are really super common, especially when you get into some complex triads with flat 9, sharp 11, and flat 13. Don't forget your free music theory survival guide. Just go to joshring.com/free. It has, again, most of these common intervals that you'll encounter and a whole lot more. I think you'll find it super helpful. And in the comments below, let me know what strategy you resonated most with, what's going to help you the most. And if you have any questions, let me know that as well. So thanks for hanging out with me today. Have a wonderful day.